We've spent a lot of the offseason talking about the Chicago Bears trading down in the first round, but the team is also in a good position to trade back up in the second round.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, we explore the Bears' opportunities and possibilities for trading up from their second round pick, 53rd overall. Although I suppose they could easily trade up from 61 or 64 as well, because of all the draft capital they do have this year and now in future years. First, we'll look at why they might want to, what would make it worth it to them, the players that seem to fit in this sweet spot that I'm identifying as like late first round and early second round, where there's a lot of quality players all clustered in a similar spot where the Bears might be able to go up and get the one they want. Then we'll look at the mechanisms for how they might get there. First, why a trade up from even 53 all the way back into the first round is difficult, but not impossible. It's not something we've seen a lot lately, but has been done before, and we'll look at what the price range might be for that. And then we'll look at more reasonable, I think, trades of moving up within the second round to get higher up in there to get a player the Bears might want to make sure they secure and not have to just hope and pray they fall all the way down to 53. I really think the way that this draft class sets up, there's a nice contingencies of players here right in that late first, early second round range where a lot of guys that fit the Bears' positions of need that would be too early to take with their first round pick at 9 overall, but definitely most of those guys not going to make it all the way down to 53. And it feels like the sort of range that Ryan Poles may end up or should end up being interested in trying to get back into. I certainly can understand the perspective of like, okay, there's actually a lot of different players in that range that we like, and we can sit back and let one or multiple of them try and fall down to 53. But I also feel like, especially when you're in a position like Chicago is with specific needs on this roster that you feel like you have to fill with your top draft picks. You know, 4 picks in the top 64. You need to get an offensive tackle, it feels like. You need to get one or at least one, if not 2, defensive linemen in this range. And certainly the more needs you start to feel like you have to fill, the less inclined you would be to give up multiple picks in this range to move up. There's like a catch-22 there. But at the same time, you feel like, man, if none of the good offensive tackles make it to 53, are the Bears screwed? Maybe not screwed, but is there more pressure to move up from 53 to go get that offensive tackle that you like? Is there more pressure to move up from 53 to go get that defensive tackle or defensive end that you like, to make sure you get one to fill positions of need? And it depends on how the Bears evaluate this draft class, but I think there's a number of guys in this range that make a lot of sense that the team could be interested in going after. There's guys that will probably be mid first round picks that probably won't fall super far, but you never know. You know, could someone like Lucas Van Ness fall, maybe probably not in the second round, but to the late first and be in the Bears range? Could Kalijah Cansey from Pittsburgh as an undersized defensive tackle fall towards the late first and all of a sudden be in the mix for the Bears there? Or on the offensive line, you know, Broderick Jones from Georgia or Darnell Wright from Tennessee, even Anton Harrison from Oklahoma could be a late first round pick, could be a second round guy. You know, guys in that range that you would have to move back up into the top 31 to make sure that you could go get at that spot. Or there's a wider range of guys, I think, that fall more into the like probably there in the early second. And do you want to risk waiting to see if they'll fall all the way to you at the 53rd pick? So like on the defensive line, Brian Bresee from Clemson might be a first round pick, might not. To me, he's borderline in that regard, and he could be down there. And same thing with the Northwestern defensive lineman out of Bawore. His first, I can barely pronounce his last name. I'm not gonna try and butcher his first name. But like those two guys are in that borderline first to second round range. That, man, if they're still there when you get to 35 overall, 40 overall, does that start to be real tempting to go get two players that have a lot of first round buzz with some high upside there on the defensive line? That's a huge position of need for the Bears. Or on the offensive line, Anton Harrison, I just mentioned from Oklahoma, if he makes it all the way into the second round, or DeWand Jones, the Ohio State offensive tackle, who's the right tackle, who's 6'8", 375, who, by the way, just had his official top 30 pre-draft workout meeting with the Chicago Bears. So they're clearly doing their homework on him as a prospect that they got to see at the Senior Bowl as well. Or even at center, John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota is a guy who I think is a first-round talent, but sometimes centers and interior offensive linemen fall a little bit. You could throw Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin in that conversation as well. I mean, there's guys there that you might want to move up for because you're not sure they're going to make it to 53. Even some of the positions of lesser need that would still add a lot to this team that might be best player available types, like Deonte Banks, the cornerback from Maryland, a few cornerbacks in this range. Cam Smith from South Carolina, Keely Ringo from Georgia. There's a Mississippi State kid in there as well. I forget his name off the top of my head. There's some good cornerbacks there, and the Bears have expressed some interest in upgrading that position and would be an upgrade over Kindle Vildor with any of those three guys. I would even consider the tight ends if they start to fall. Certainly if either Michael Mayer from Notre Dame or Dalton Kincaid from Utah somehow fell out of the first round or even late first, those are the types of players I think could be high impact guys that would be really, really important additions to the short and long-term future of this team. And we just talked on yesterday's podcast about how the wide receivers, there's a lot of them in this second, late first, early second round range. And the whole podcast yesterday was kind of about how I don't think it's worth going after one of them specifically. The podcast was JSN at number 9 or in the first round if you trade down, and then kind of skip wide receivers in this range. So I'm not going to say that's a direction I would want to go, but it's possible the Bears could see one of these second round wide receivers as a guy to go get and not want to sit there and wait at 53 and hope one of them falls. All of it is trying to feel out the market and the class strength for each position and say, okay, who do I think can I get at 53 and who might I absolutely have to make sure I move up and go get, whether that's late first or early in the second round. We'll take a look at what then mechanically it might take. What would the Bears have to give up to get back into the first round? And then we'll also look at back, higher up into the second round, looking at some of the recent trades historically to try and get a sense of what other teams have been giving up to move into that range. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Ultimate Pro Football GM. It is a fun mobile app on your phone. It's a game that's completely free to play that puts you in complete control of your own NFL franchise. If you've ever wanted to be a general manager, this game is for you because you get to make the draft picks and decide, do I trade up back into the first round? Do I trade up higher into the second round? Do I need to take the wide receiver there? Do I need to take the edge rusher, the offensive tackle, and so much more? Free agent decisions, all sorts of trades, contract extensions, hiring and firing coaches, scouts, coordinators, training staff. You can set ticket prices and advertising deals, set your lineups in the season, and so much more, all in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, so you can play on the go wherever you are, whenever you want to. Locked On Bears listeners will get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you enter in our promo code Locked On in the game store. You got to make sure it's in all caps though, Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. I really like to dig deep on draft trades to try and find what's going to be most realistic for the Chicago Bears. There's the draft trade charts that you can find online, that famously the Jimmy Johnson chart, but there have been a couple other iterations that come out since that essentially take every draft pick and assign it a numerical value of how much it's worth. And then each pick is worth a certain number of points. And then you try and match up your pick's points with the points of the pick you're trying to trade for and try and get them as equal as possible. We've seen over the years that it's a loose guideline that NFL teams might loosely follow, but in practice, you don't see teams follow it very strictly and often deviate from it quite a bit. And so I don't necessarily like to sit here on the podcast and just say, well, here's the chart. And if the Bears have 53 and 61 and 64, then, 53 and 61 combined to be this many points. And that would mean they get up to this pick. I mean, it's probably worth mentioning, but like, it's not necessarily what we should base our entire decision-making process on. Like, for example, to briefly touch on that, the 53rd pick is worth 370 points, and the 61st pick is worth 292 points. Quick math says that's, just under 668 or 662 points, which would get you up to the 28th overall pick, the Cincinnati Bengals. Would be 660 points, would be the closest valuation if you just paired the Bears' 2 second-round picks, 53 and 61. All right, boring, end of conversation, right? That's kind of as far as you can go when you just rely on the draft trade chart. But what I like to do instead is use that as one piece of context, sure, but also understand that teams often deviate from that a little bit, and also teams don't often pick in these exact picks and draft or trade up into the exact spots that the Bears might be looking to trade. And so you kind of have to do some math and just sort of like do some estimation based on, okay, other teams picking in other spots have traded to similar areas, and how can we sort of bend that to where the Bears are and where they might want to go. And I looked back over the last 5 years of drafts, back to 2018, and looked at every single draft trade in the second and first rounds here, specifically for the range we're talking about here, to try and get a sense. And I'll tell you what, we have not had a team trade from the first round back more than like 15 picks, or really not much more than 10 picks since 2019. Like in the last 3 drafts, 2022, 2021, 2020, you have not seen teams go from the late first round deep into the second round. You'll see them jump from 28 to 34 or 30 to 37, right? Like still like upper second round, they'll go back from the first round, but rarely do you see a team go as far back as where the Bears' second round pick is, where the earliest second round pick that they own, 53rd overall to the Baltimore Ravens. That's going to make it extremely difficult to move up back into the first round. That's my first big takeaway from this process. Not many teams are going to be sitting there with their first round pick and be okay dropping all the way back to 53 unless you really sweeten the pot quite a bit. The Bears could certainly trade a future first round pick to get back into the first round this year, to pair a future first round pick with their pick, a pick this year or a combination of picks this year. I don't think you'll find too many Bears fans that are super fired up about the idea. The Bears do have two first-round picks next year, so you have an extra one if that was something you really wanted to do, but that feels more like a move that a team makes when you're trying to get one more guy to go all in on this year, right? You mortgage a little bit of the future to get a guy right now that you really believe in and value in. Yes, it's a rookie, but still not exactly where the Bears are from a pick evaluation standpoint. The closest thing we saw was 2018. So there, in that year, I actually don't remember what team. Oh, it would have been the Baltimore Ravens had the 52nd pick. So one pick ahead of where the Bears are now. They traded that 52nd pick and got to the 32nd pick, the last pick of the first round, to trade for Lamar Jackson. They moved up from 52 to 32. Whatever team moved down, which that's the team I don't remember, the team that moved down there was willing to go down 20 spots from 32 to 52. Certainly, if the Bears were to move up from 53 to 31, the last pick in the first round, that would be 22 spots. We have not seen a team go that far in a long time. I couldn't find one, but I didn't look for decades and decades back in history. But in order to for the Ravens to move from 52 to 32 to get Lamar Jackson, they gave up a future second-round pick, and then they swapped fourths with the Ravens. So basically, it was 52 and a future second for 32, and then a slight pick swap, but that's not really a lot in terms of, that's just peanuts added to the top of it. So maybe the Bears wouldn't have to give up a future first to go from 53 into the first round, but at a minimum, perhaps then a future second, or maybe both of your 2 second-round picks, 53 and 61, would be enough to get the job done, but it's going to be tough. You might have to throw in a 5th-round pick with that, a little bit of something extra to go through with that. Because, funny enough, I dealt with this a little bit. We did a Locked On Podcast Network mock draft live all together on one big Zoom call and negotiated through every pick, which is going to be coming out here next week. Late next week, I think April 20th is the day we're going to put that out. And so I'm not going to give away any spoilers here, but I was in negotiations with multiple teams about trying to trade up from 53 to get back into the first round of our just one round mock draft to try and get an offensive tackle late in the draft. And I will say in some of those negotiations, it was difficult when my best offer could be 53 and 61, and they could get 1 or even 2 second-round picks from other teams that were both better second-round picks. And so it's not an advantageous spot for the Bears to be able to trade back into the first round the way they might want to, or the way you might want to see them trade back up without having to give up significant, like a big future pick that you don't want to. Because the advantage of trading up this year is because you have 2 second-round picks, 2 fourth-round picks, 2 fifth-round picks, and 2 seventh-round picks. The Bears have draft capital this year that they don't need to make all of those picks. You'd like to make all 4 of those picks in the top 64, but you don't need to make all of those picks in the 4th, 5th, and 7th rounds. You don't necessarily need 6 players after the 100th pick of the draft. And so those are the ones that feel a bit more expendable to me. And I will say the one other trade that was like near this Bears pick, the Falcons went from 45 to 31, which is still 8 picks higher than where the Bears are. And to go from 45 to 31, they had to give up a 3rd round pick and got a 6th round pick in return. So it was 45 and a 3rd for 31 and a 6th. That was when the Falcons moved up for Caleb McGarry. Other than that, like it would take a team being really interested in moving down for the Bears to get any kind of good deal to move back up all the way up into the first round. But they can better use those extra 4th and 5th and 7th round picks that they have to move up within the second round without having to give up any of their top 64 draft picks. So we'll see what kind of value the Bears can get to move within the second to still get a better player than what they think might fall to them at 53. Next on Locked On Bears. So there weren't very many trades of a team going from as far as 53 back into the first round, but there have been plenty of trades over the last 5 drafts of teams around the 53rd pick moving up within the second round. And even this past draft, we saw the actual 53rd pick traded twice in the same draft before it was actually gone as a pick. So we have some pretty direct one-to-one comparison value of, okay, what did it take last year and what does it take and how can we apply that to this year? The 53rd pick, I believe, was originally owned by the Green Bay Packers because they traded 53 to move up to 34 to take Christian Watson, the wide receiver from North Dakota State. That's as close to the first round as you can get, essentially, without actually going up back into the first round. And for them, they had to pair their 2 second-round picks last year. 53 plus 59 got them to 34. So that would tell you if it was 53 and 59, the Bears have 53 and 61, probably going to get you to a similar range. If you paired those the 2 second-round picks that the Bears had in order to move up, might not be enough to get you right into the first round in terms of real-world value, but in terms of what we've seen other teams do, 33, 34, 35 range feels like where the Bears could get up to if you package those 2 picks. If they want to just move up a little bit farther, we then later saw the 53rd pick in that same draft traded again. The Colts got it. So it was the Colts who moved down to the Packers, and then the Colts traded it again to move up for Alec Pierce, the Cincinnati wide receiver. A lot of wide receiver trades in the second round last year, but they traded their second, the 53rd pick, a 3rd and a 6th for 42 and a 4th. So the Bears could package 53 with, well, it's tough because their 3rd round pick is 64, right? So 64 is a lot better of a pick than 77. So it's not a one-to-one comparison, but maybe instead of giving up 53 and 61 to get up to 34, you could give up 53 and 64 and go a little bit less high, but still get significantly higher in the draft and hold on to that 61st pick as your second round pick and maybe get some kind of, 4th or 5th round pick back in return as a part of that exchange. If they want to go a little bit shorter, maybe you're not jumping up into the 30s, but even just higher up in the 50s. Last year we saw 54 and a 5th to move up to 60. So you can move up 4 spots from 54 by just giving up one of your 5th round picks, or a team went from 60 to 57, just up 3 spots for a 6th round pick. So that feels about more where the Bears might be in that regard. If they're sitting there, if the second round's going down, we get to 40, we get to 45, and somebody's still sitting there. One of the offensive tackles, DeJuan Jones from Ohio State, or the center, John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota, or somehow Adebawore from Northwestern is still on the board there, or one of these other players that they really like. And they say, what, we just need to jump up a handful of spots because we're worried that one of the teams immediately picking right ahead of us, they had 53, the teams right before them are the Seahawks at 52, the Dolphins at 51, the Buccaneers at 50, the Steelers at 49, the Lions at 48. We got to get past one of those teams. Can we jump up from 53 to say 47 at Washington? Maybe that just costs your fifth-round pick. It's an early fifth-round pick for where the Bears pick in the order, but still, a fifth-round pick to move up 4 or 5 spots when, again, you already have 2 fifth-round picks, and you have 2 fourth-round picks, and 2 seventh-round picks. Not that big of a deal to give up one of those fifths. I also think it's not that big of a deal to give up one of those fourths if you wanted to move even a little bit higher up, right? The Bears are in a really good spot here to still pick 4 times in the top 64 and still be able to trade up from 53 even a little bit. You can move up without giving up 61 or 64 and move up from 53 to get more of a premium second-round pick and then still circle back and grab guys almost back-to-back at 61, at 64, and feel like you're getting 4 really talented players while still having the ammunition to move up and make sure that you're really getting one of the guys that you really want with those picks. And then you kind of go down the board of history. It's a lot of that, like you could give up a future third instead of a fourth, or, a team moved from 59 to 50 by giving up a third and getting a fourth back. So you can do like a pick swap sort of exchange in that regard. But I think the goal for the Bears should either be you package 2 of your top 64 picks to really go up high, maybe to the first round or really, really high second round to get a guy that you feel like is a first round talent that you just can't miss on, or you package your 53rd pick and one of your 4th or 5th round picks to move up within the second round to get a guy that might not be a first round talent, but to feel like is a real second rounder that you just can't pass on, that you just don't think he's going to make it to 53, but we got to have him. Not because he's a first round pick that we really feel like is an absolute steal who's falling this far, but like think about last year, the way the Bears talked about Kyler Gordon. After the draft, Ryan Poles said, when the Bears did their mock draft simulations pre-draft, they never planned for a scenario where Kyler Gordon would be on the board where they were drafting. I don't think they thought he was going to be a first round pick, but they just thought he would for sure go early enough in the second round that they wouldn't get a shot to draft him. Clearly, they liked enough other players at that spot to feel like they didn't feel like they had to trade up to get him, but they were happy to get him when he was there. But right, so there might be players that are that same type of player where it's like, we don't think Adebawore from Northwestern is the name I keep coming back to from the top of my head. We don't think he's going to be there at 53. But we don't know that he's going to be a first round pick either, but we don't think he's going to be there at 53. And so all of a sudden you get to pick 40, you get to pick 45, and he's still there. And is that the time you say, well, screw it, let's give up a 4th, let's give up a 5th, or a 5th and a 7th, some combination to move up and make sure that we get that guy. That's where it feels like the Bears are in a really good position to do so, because they can easily absorb the loss of a 4th or a 5th or a 7th round pick this year because they have extras and still be in a great position to get some really good players for this team. That's why I think it's going to be a really exciting draft, not only because they can get a top 10 player at 9 or maybe even trade down, but then in the second round, again, they have the ammunition to move and should still be able to get 3 or 4 really good players in the top 64 of this draft. It's going to be fun to break down. I do want to get into a few more of these second round prospects before we get to draft day. I don't want to spend too much time on them because the second round is the second round, but I'm sure that'll be coming here in the coming days on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts or in the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. I really appreciate you making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, make sure you check out all of our other great podcasts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and that includes all of your major sports teams. We have Locked On podcasts for every professional basketball team in the NBA, every NHL team, every MLB team, and of course, all of your NFL teams. So go check out whatever your teams are. If it's Bulls, if it's Cubs, if it's White Sox, if it's some other city, and you like teams beyond just Chicago sports, we've got a podcast for you. So go make one of those your second listen today. Come on back for another episode of Locked On Bears tomorrow. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.